On a rain-soaked Thursday evening in late October, somewhere along the forgotten hills outside Kanpur, a girl vanished into darkness, and for the first time in decades, the most feared man in northern India discovered that power meant nothing. Her name was Anya Verma. She was 16 years old. She wore a pale blue sweater that still smelled faintly of her mother's perfume, the last thing her mother had left behind before she died. And her father. Her father was Thomas Verma. If you never heard that name, it's not because it isn't important. It's because people who know it don't say it out loud. Thomas Verma didn't run a company. He didn't hold office. He didn't appear on any official list of influence. But his reach extended into ports, into courts, into contracts signed in rooms where no cameras were allowed. His empire was quiet, invisible, and absolute. If Thomas wanted something done, it happened. And if it didn't, someone disappeared. For 15 years, that rule had never failed him. Until that night. The road was narrow. Too narrow for 4 black SUVs to belong there. They cut through the mist like shadows, engines low, lights slicing across wet asphalt as they climbed into the hills. Inside the lead vehicle, Thomas sat beside his daughter. Neither of them spoke. They hadn't spoken much in the past 2 years. Not since her mother died. Grief had built a wall between them, one Thomas never learned how to climb. Instead, he had done what he always did. He replaced presents with money. Boarding schools. Private tutors. Expensive gifts. Everything except himself. Anya stared out the window, watching rain streak across the glass. Then, quietly, "I want to stop." Thomas glanced at her. For what? She didn't look at him. "It's beautiful here." The hills rolled endlessly into the fog, trees swaying under the weight of rain. "It reminds me of her." That was all she said. But it wasn't enough. Thomas hesitated. The security team had already mapped the route. This stop wasn't part of the plan. Nothing outside the plan ever was. But then he looked at his daughter. And for a moment, just a moment, he remembered what it felt like to choose something that wasn't control. He picked up the radio. We stopped. The vehicles pulled over near a bend in the road. No guardrails. Just a steep drop beyond the edge. The rain had softened the ground, turned soil into something unstable, something waiting to give way. But no one said that out loud. Because no one ever questioned Thomas Verma. Anya stepped out first. She breathed in deeply. For the first time that day she smiled. A small smile. But real. And Thomas saw it. It looked exactly like her mother's. Careful, one of the guards said. But she had already stepped closer to the edge, raising her phone. The valley below stretched into darkness. Clouds drifted low, swallowing everything beyond a few meters. It felt like standing at the edge of the world. She took one more step. The ground didn't crack. It didn't warp. It simply disappeared. There was a sound. Sudden. Like the earth exhaling. And then she was gone. Thomas didn't remember moving. 1 second he was standing still. The next he was at the edge, dropping to his knees, hands scraping against wet rock. A guard lunged forward too late. The soil collapsed further, sliding into the ravine below. Then, a voice, faint, woke him. She was alive. Flashlights cut into the darkness. Beams searched. Found her. 30 feet down. A narrow ledge. Barely wide enough to hold her body. She lay twisted, clutching her side. Blood streaked across her forehead. Her leg bent at an angle that shouldn't exist. And beneath that ledge, nothing. Just a drop into jagged stone. Thomas didn't breathe. Get her up. His voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that meant something inside him was breaking. The men moved instantly. Ropes. Harnesses. Professional precision. These weren't ordinary guards. They were trained. Experienced. Men who had handled worse. Or thought they had. The first descent lasted less than 5 minutes. Then, stop. The man on the rope froze. The rock shifted. Not cracked. Shifted. Like something unstable beneath the surface. He climbed back up. Shaking his head. Too soft. Second attempt. Different angle. More support. They got further this time. Closer. Close enough for Anya to reach out. Close enough for hope. Then the ledge cracked. A thin line. Running straight through it. The man froze. And slowly backed away. Thomas watched everything. Said nothing. Because he understood something now. Something he had never faced before. This wasn't a problem he could command away. How long? He asked. No one answered. That was worse than any answer. One of the men finally spoke. 4 hours, maybe less. For what? For the cold to take her. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Thomas looked down into the ravine. His daughter was shivering. Trying not to cry. Trying to be strong. Alone. For 15 years, Thomas Verma had believed one thing above all else. Everything had a price. Every problem could be solved. Every obstacle could be removed. But the mountain didn't care. It didn't know his name. It didn't fear his money. It didn't obey. He took off his coat. Expensive. Worth more than most people in that region earned in a year. He rolled it tight. Threw it down. It paused. Then, I got it. Her voice. Weaker now. Thomas stayed on his knees. Rain soaking through his clothes. Cold biting into his skin. He didn't move. Behind him, his men stood helpless. For the first time in their lives, they had no solution. Time passed. Minutes felt like hours. The temperature dropped. The wind picked up. And then, headlights. In yellow. But not part of the convoy. A small, battered scooter stopped behind the black SUVs. The engine clicked off. Silence returned. A woman stepped off. Then, wearing a worn-out uniform. The kind you'd see in roadside restaurants. Hair tied back. Hands up. Her name was Catherine. A waitress. Someone no one in that place would have noticed on any other day. She looked at the scene. The men. The ropes. The broken attempts. Then she heard it. The crying. From below. She didn't hesitate. She walked forward. Past the guards. Past the tension. Past the invisible line people didn't cross. A hand grabbed her arm. Stop. Restrictive. She pulled free. Not violently. Just firmly. There's a child down there, she said. Her voice wasn't loud. But it carried. And then, she reached the edge. Lay flat. Looked down. She saw everything. The ledge. The crack. The angle. The mistake. And then she stood up. Turned. Looked directly at Thomas. Everyone expected her to lower her gaze. To step back. To apologize. She didn't. You're doing it wrong. Silence. To. Absolute. One of the guards stepped forward. Anger rising. But Thomas raised his hand. And everything stopped. He looked at her. Really looked. At the worn clothes. The calm eyes. The absence of fear. And something inside him paused. What did you say? Catherine didn't flinch. If you keep going like this, she said, you'll kill her before the cold does. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not in years. And yet, he didn't get angry. He listened. For the first time in a long time. Power made space for truth. Rain kept falling. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just steadily enough to make everything worse. Wet soil. Slippery stone. Cold that slipped into bone 1 quiet inch at a time. Below the road, Anya Verma was still trapped on a narrow ledge halfway down the ravine, shivering beneath her father's coat, trying not to cry where anyone could hear. Above her, 6 armed men, 4 luxury vehicles, thousands of crores in invisible power, and not one of them could reach her. And then there was Catherine. A roadside waitress in a faded uniform and worn shoes, standing in the center of men who had built their entire lives around obedience. She should have looked small there. She didn't, because some people are not powerful in the usual way. Some people are powerful because when everyone else is calculating risk, they are still capable of seeing what is right. And in rooms ruled by fear, that kind of person is dangerous. Thomas Verma looked at her in silence. The rain traced lines down his face and collar. Mud stained his trousers where he had knelt on the ground. His hair was wet, his jaw locked, his hands scraped raw from gripping the edge of the road. He looked less like a king and more like a man who had just discovered that kings cannot command gravity. "You said we're doing it wrong," he said. Catherine nodded once. "You One of the guards let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, short, sharp, disbelieving. Another muttered, "This is absurd." Catherine ignored both. Her eyes went back to the ravine. "The rope angle is wrong. Your weight transfer is wrong. The ledge is carrying too much vibration." The tallest man among them, broad-shouldered, quiet, scar near the chin, stepped forward. This one was not just muscle. Catherine recognized it instantly. He was the kind of man who noticed everything and trusted almost no one. His name, though she did not know it yet, was Arjun Singh, Thomas's right hand. The man others feared almost as much as Thomas himself. "And you know this how?" he asked. Catherine answered without looking at him. "Because if you knew rock, you wouldn't be trying to force a straight descent down rotten shale after 5 days of rain." That got his attention. It got everyone's. She stepped closer to the edge, crouched again, and shone her small flashlight across the south wall of the ravine instead of directly downward. Her light moved carefully. Searche. Measure. Then stopped. Though. A diagonal cut in the rock. Not obvious unless you knew how rain carved its own pathways over decades. A natural water runnel. No. Steep. But not vertical. And most importantly, not shale. Sandstone. Dense. Stable enough. Not for a heavy man in tactical gear. But maybe for someone smaller. Someone light. Someone willing. Catherine stood. "There's another way down." No one spoke. She pointed toward the slanted channel. About 40 feet south, water cut a path through the wall. The angle survivable. The rock will hold if the person descending doesn't weigh too much. Arjun crossed his arms. "You're guessing." "No," Catherine said. I'm reading the mountain." That should have gone badly. That should have triggered offense, insult, retaliation. Instead, Thomas asked only one thing. "Can you get to her?" Catherine looked at him then. Really looked. She saw expensive shoes caked in mud, a shirt that belonged in a boardroom now clinging to a man standing in the rain like punishment. She saw the force in him, the danger, the self-control, and beneath it, something else. There. Raw and helpless and unhidden. And maybe because she had spent enough years serving tea to men who mistook politeness for weakness, she recognized immediately that this one was not pretending. He was terrified. Not for himself. For his daughter. And that changed the moral equation. Catherine said, "Yes." The air shifted. It was almost physical. Arjun's head turned sharply. Another guard took a step forward. "Sir, absolutely not. We don't know who she is." Catherine gave a humorless little smile. "That's the least urgent problem on this road." Thomas didn't smile. But something in his face nearly did. "What do you need?" he asked. Catherine answered immediately. 15 minutes. Medical tape if you have it. A flashlight that won't die halfway. And everybody except 2 useful people needs to stop talking. A silence followed that was so complete it almost sounded respectful. Then Thomas turned his head slightly. "Do exactly what she says." Arjun looked at him. Just for a second. Not disobedient. Just surprise. Because in Thomas Verma's world, instructions flowed in one direction. And tonight, for the first time, they had just changed course. Catherine turned and jogged back toward her scooter. It was parked beneath a neem tree, rain ticking softly against its dented metal body. A plastic delivery crate was strapped to the back. Most people would have seen nothing worth noticing. Thomas's men saw what she pulled out of it and went quiet again. Not because it looked impressive. Because it looked whole. Coiled climbing rope, yes, but not the sleek synthetic kind they had been using. This was braided, thick, slightly rough, wrapped in wax cloth to keep out moisture. 2 iron pulleys. A compact rescue sling. A narrow harness. A folded emergency thermal sheet. a weatherproof pouch of medical supplies, and a length of reinforced cotton tape. Arjun stared. What is this? Museum equipment? Catherine kept moving. No, it's equipment that works when people stop trying to impress each other. One of the younger guards nearly choked, trying not to laugh. Arjun gave him a single look, and that ended. Catherine laid everything out on the wet ground with practiced efficiency. No wasted motion. No performance. Just competent. That, more than anything, unsettled them. Because competence without permission is threatening to people who live by hierarchy. Thomas watched her hands. Steady. Pet. Not frantic. Not dramatic. She moved like someone who had done difficult things before and did not need witnesses to believe it. Who taught you? He asked. Catherine tied a figure-8 knot without looking up. My father repaired hillside retaining walls before he died. Another knot. My mother stitched people up in our neighborhood because the clinic was too far and too expensive. She clipped the pulley into place. And I've spent half my life working where people only notice me when something spills. That line landed harder than anyone expected. Because it was true in more ways than one. Invisible people learn things. They learn to listen while others talk freely. They learn to watch systems fail from underneath. They learn where the cracks are literal and human. And once in a while, when silence becomes immoral, they speak. That was what Thomas was witnessing now. Not bravery in the loud sense. Something rare. Moral interruption. She fitted the harness around her waist and thighs, checked the stitching twice, then looked at Arjun. Come here. He blinked. It was possible no one had addressed him like that in years. But he stepped forward. She handed him the brake line. When I say stop, you stop. If I say pull, you pull evenly. If you panic, we all die. Understood? Arjun stared at her for half a beat. Then nodded. Understood. Thomas noticed that. He noticed everything tonight. The way his men who usually moved like extensions of his will were beginning to orient themselves around Catherine's instructions without even meaning to. It should have irritated him. It didn't, because his daughter was still down there. And Catherine was the first person who had made the impossible sound practical. She walked toward the edge of the ravine. Thomas stepped into her path. Not to stop her. Just close enough that the others automatically looked away. Her name is Anya, he said quietly. Catherine nodded. He swallowed once. It looked difficult. She hates hospitals. Catherine waited. She pretends she doesn't, but she does. Another pause. Then, lower. She's afraid of being left in white rooms. That one told Catherine more than the first sentence had. Not just about the girl. About the father. About what had already been lost in that family. I'll remember, she said. Thomas's eyes stayed on hers. Then he said, in a voice so controlled it nearly broke from the effort of staying that way. Bring her back. It was not an order. It sounded like one because that was the only language he had ever been allowed to speak in. But Catherine heard the truth underneath it. Please. And because she had spent enough of her life translating the emotional illiteracy of men into actual meaning, she understood. I'll try, she said. No, Thomas said immediately. The word came out rough. Then softer. As long as you can do it without dying, try is enough. That changed something. It was a small thing. But it mattered. Because powerful men often ask for miracles without caring what they cost. Thomas, for all his darkness, had just done the opposite. He had made room for her choice. And Catherine noticed. She clipped in. Tested the line. Then lowered herself over the edge. The ravine swallowed light fast. Within seconds, she was only a moving beam and the soft sound of ropes sliding through metal. Above, no one spoke. Arjun held the brake line exactly as instructed. Thomas stood so close to the edge it made everyone nervous. But no one told him to step back. No one was stupid enough for that. The descent was slower than it looked. Wet sandstone doesn't forgive arrogance. Catherine placed each foot carefully, finding friction where there barely was any, shifting weight with the precision of someone who understood that survival is often just patience under pressure. 10 feet. 15. 20. The beam from her headlamp swept across the wall. Then, A voice from below. Then, frightened. Who's there? Catherine froze, anchoring one boot into a shallow groove. Her voice, when she answered, was calm and low. My name is Catherine. If pause. Then, shakier. Are you from rescue? No, Catherine said. And because truth matters most when people are terrified, she added. I'm just the one who came. Above the ravine, Thomas closed his eyes. Not because the answer scared him. Because something about it was unbearable. Not because it was poetic. Because it was true. Not rescue. Not protocol. Not institution. Not power. Just the one who came. Below, Anya let out a tiny sound that might have been a sob. My leg hurts. I know. I can't feel my fingers. I know. It's cold. I know. Catherine descended another few feet. Now she could see her clearly. Pale face. Blood dried at the temple. Lips tinged faintly blue. Right ankle swollen and wrong. Left hand wrapped around her ribs. The ledge beneath her had a visible fracture line near the back edge. Worse than from above. But still enough. If no one rushed. If no one panicked. If the mountain allowed it. Catherine reached the ledge and didn't step onto it immediately. Instead, she pressed her body sideways against the wall, testing the shelf with distributed weight. The rock held. For now. Anya, she said gently, I need you to listen to me. The girl's eyes found hers in the dark. Bright with pain and fear. But listening. That mattered. I'm going to touch your ankle in a minute. It's going to hurt. Then I'm going to wrap you up and attach you to me. You are not going to help. You are only going to breathe and listen. Can you do that? Anya swallowed. Then nodded once. Catherine smiled very slightly. That means you're already useful. Above them, Arjun muttered under his breath, who talks like that? Thomas answered without taking his eyes off the darkness. Someone who knows how to keep people alive. And for once, no one argued. The first thing Catherine did when she reached Anya was not dramatic. It was not cinematic. It was not the kind of thing people applaud. She checked the girl's pupils. Then her pulse. Then her breathing. Because panic loves spectacle. But survival is almost always procedural. Look at me, Catherine said softly. Anya's eyes were glassy with cold, but alert enough to follow the light. Catherine touched her wrists. Fast pulse. Expected. She pressed two fingers gently along the ribs Anya had been protecting with her arm. The girl gasped sharply. Sorry, Catherine murmured. No, you're not, Anya whispered through chattering teeth. And Catherine, despite the danger, almost smiled. That was useful too. Sarcasm meant the girl's mind was still with her. Fair, Catherine said, but I'm still helping you. Anya's mouth trembled. Then unexpectedly she gave the smallest breath of a laugh. Above the ravine, Thomas heard it. And the sound nearly broke him. Because it had been a long time since he had heard his daughter sound like a child instead of a wound. Catherine worked quickly. She wrapped Anya in the emergency thermal sheet first, then tightened Thomas's coat over it to preserve heat. She stabilized the ankle with two slim splints from her kit and secured them with tape. Not perfect. Good enough. Then she checked the forehead cut. Deep, but not catastrophic. Blood loss had slowed. She pressed gauze against it and bandaged it down. All the while, she kept talking. Not because conversation was comforting. Because it kept Anya conscious. Do you know what day it is? Catherine asked. Thursday. Who's the Prime Minister? Anya squinted. Why does that matter? It doesn't. I'm checking whether your brain is still rude. A tiny pause. Then Anya whispered, it is. Excellent. Above them, one of Thomas's men let out a surprised breath that might have become a laugh if he had remembered where he was. No one shushed him. No one dared. Because every person at the edge of that ravine had unconsciously given their faith to the woman below. Not because she had authority. Because she had earned belief in real time. That is a different kind of power. And unlike fear, it cannot be faked. Catherine shifted her weight and glanced at the back edge of the ledge again. The fracture line had widened. Not dramatically, But enough. The shelf was failing by degrees. She had maybe 15 minutes. 20 if the earth was merciful. The earth rarely is. She clipped a short tether around Anya's chest and under her arms, then secured the girl's weight to the front anchor of her own harness. Not to carry her like dead weight. To move as one center of gravity. That mattered. Listen carefully, Catherine said. When we move, it's going to hurt. Anya shut her eyes. Okay. And when it hurts, I need you not to fight me. Another nod. Okay. If you panic, tell me. Don't hide it. Anya opened her eyes again. For a moment, the child in her fell away, and what looked back at Catherine was older than 16. The look of someone who had learned too young that if you are frightened around powerful people, you become inconvenient. People usually prefer if I hide it, she said. Catherine stilled. Just for a second. Then she answered in a voice so plain it felt almost sacred. Then they failed you. Above the ravine, Thomas heard every word. And if shame had weight, it would have knocked him to his knees harder than the mountain had. Because truth doesn't always arrive as accusation. Sometimes it arrives as a sentence spoken gently to someone else. And hurts more because of it. Catherine checked the main rope line. Then the back up. Then she looked upward. Ready? Arjun shouted. Not yet, she called back. She was about to test the first transfer when her light swept over something near the rear corner of the ledge. A jagged metal edge. Half buried in mud and fractured stone. That shouldn't have been there. She leaned carefully, keeping most of her weight toward the wall. Her fingers brushed cold steel. A small casing. Blackened. Partially crushed. Industrial. Not natural debris. Not road material. Something manufactured. Something burnt. Her expression changed. Subtly. But enough that Anya noticed. What is it? Catherine slipped the object into the outer pouch of her medical satchel without answering immediately. Then she looked up toward the road. Toward the collapsed edge. Toward the pattern of the failure. Too clean in one section. Too sudden. Too directional. Rain weakens ground, yes. But ground does not always fall the way this had. Not unless it was encouraged. Catherine's stomach tightened. She knew enough to know what she did not yet know. And that was dangerous. Catherine, Anya whispered. Catherine met her eyes again and made a decision. Not to tell the girl. Not yet. Nothing you need to worry about right now, she said. First we leave. Above, Thomas was still watching the darkness with the concentration of a man trying to force control into existence through sheer will. He saw Catherine look up. He saw something change in her face. He felt it immediately. A shit. The kind that makes predators lift their heads before the rest of the forest knows why. Arjun, he said quietly. Yes, sir. Did you see that? Arjun had. What did it mean? I don't know yet. Thomas's jaw hardened. That answer never used to be acceptable in his world. Tonight it had to be. Now Catherine called. Arjun brace. Two other men anchored themselves beside him. Thomas didn't move. On my count, Catherine said, you pull only when I say. If anyone improvises, I'll come back up and throw you down here myself. That one actually did get a short, startled laugh out of one of the guards. Even Arjun's mouth almost moved. Thomas, astonishingly, looked like he approved. Do exactly as she says, he repeated. And this time, no one needed reminding. The route back was not a straight climb. That was the entire point. Straight force had already failed. The old lesson of every broken system, when pressure destroys, leverage saves. Catherine shifted sideways first, using the narrow sandstone runnel as a diagonal escape path. It was less climbing than negotiation. One foothold. Huss. Breathe. Then another. Anya made a broken sound when the movement jarred her ribs. I know, Catherine whispered. Breathe with me. The girl matched her. Good. Very good. Pain controlled by rhythm. Fear controlled by sequence. Human beings survive terrible things one small instruction at a time. Above them, the rope moved. Slow. Precise. No one breathed normally. Not Thomas. Not Arjun. Not the men. Even the rain seemed quieter. Every inch felt expensive. Every sound mattered. The friction of rope over pulley. The scrape of Catherine's boot. The occasional involuntary gasp from Anya. The distant rush of runoff water far below. And beneath it all, something else. A groaning tension inside the ledge they had just left. Stone, remembering it was broken. Thomas crouched lower at the edge, ignoring the hands that reached instinctively toward him to keep him from slipping. He had never felt more useless in his life. And because he was honest enough to recognize the moral shape of the moment, he did not try to hide behind anger. This was what truth was doing to him. It was stripping him. Not of wealth. Not of reputation. Of illusion. The illusion that his protection had ever been the same as his presence. The illusion that money sent from a distance could keep a child warm. The illusion that command could substitute for love. All of that was dying on a roadside in the rain. And it hurt. Some forms of pain are corrective. Stop, Catherine called suddenly. The rope froze. Arjun's grip tightened. What happened? Thomas snapped. Catherine didn't answer immediately. She was listening. The wall to her left had changed sound. Anyone else might have missed it. But people who grow up around unstable stone learn the language of pressure. The mountain had just made a decision. She pressed herself tighter to the chute wall, shielding Anya with her body. Do not pull, she said, louder now. Above, every muscle locked. Then it came. A deep crack. Not sharp. Internal. Like something ancient splitting open. And then the ledge gave way. The entire slab beneath where Anya had been lying tore free from the wall and dropped into darkness. It hit the rocks below with a sound like a building collapsing. Mud and fragments burst upward. Loose stone rained through the ravine. One piece smashed against the chute wall inches from Catherine's shoulder. Anya screamed. Catherine wrapped herself around her instantly, one arm over the girl's head, the other gripping the rope with such force it burned through her palm. Above the edge, every man jerked backward in shock. Thomas lunged so violently toward the drop that Arjun physically caught him by the arm. So, Thomas tore free. Catherine. No answer. The ravine filled with falling debris. Thus, chill. Silence. Then, a voice. Breathless. Steady. We're alive. The sound that left Thomas after that was not dignified. It was not control. It was something rawer than relief and uglier than prayer. He bent forward, both hands braced on his knees, and for 1 second the world saw what no one in his empire was ever meant to witness. A powerful man, completely undone. Arjun looked away first. Not out of embarrassment. Out of respect. Below, Catherine waited until the debris stopped. Then she checked Anya's pupils again. Still responsive. Good. Talk to me, she said. Anya was sobbing now, openly. It fell. I know. We were on it. I know. I saw it. I know. Catherine pressed her forehead lightly to the girl's for one brief second. You're still here. That was the whole miracle. Not dramatic. Not poetic. Just true. You're still here. Sometimes that is the only sentence that matters. They resumed the climb. Slower now. More careful. Anya cried when movement jarred her ribs and ankle. Catherine kept talking. Not soothing exactly. Steadying. Tell me something about your mother. The question surprised the girl enough to cut through the pain. She hated papaya. Reasonable. She said it tasted like disappointment. Catherine snorted softly. That's excellent. Anya gave a shaky, wet laugh. She also said rich people never know where the good tea is. That almost made Catherine smile again. She was direct about that too. Above the ravine, Thomas heard every word. And this time the pain that crossed his face was different. Not only grief. Gratitude. Because Catherine had somehow done what he had not been able to do in 2 years. She had brought his wife back into their daughter's mouth without making it hurt like death. That alone would have been enough to humble him. The rescue was simply the visible part. The last 10 feet were the hardest. Not because of terrain. Because hope is dangerous near the end. People rush when they can almost touch safety. Rushing kills. Catherine knew that. So she kept the pace. Slow. Measure. Exact. Her hands were numb. Her thigh muscles shook. Her left palm was bleeding from rope burn inside the glove. Her shoulder had begun to spasm from bearing Anya's shifted weight. She ignored all of it. Because there are moments in life when discomfort becomes morally irrelevant. This was one. At last, her hand found the upper lip of the slope. The Brett. Road edge. Solid ground. Pull, she shouted. The men above hauled in unison. Arjun dropped to one knee and reached down first. Catherine ignored his hand and pushed Anya upward instead. Always the injured person first. Arjun understood immediately. He grabbed the girl under the arms and lifted. Another man took her legs. Thomas was there before either of them fully cleared the edge. He fell to his knees in the mud and caught his daughter like a man trying to reverse time with his body. Anya made a sound Catherine would remember for years. Not just pain. Not just fear. Recognition. That. Thomas folded over her. One hand at the back of her head, one arm around her shoulders, as if the earth might still try to steal her and he intended to fight it barehanded. He did not speak at first. Could it? His face was buried in her wet hair. His shoulders shook once. Then again. Then he whispered, so broken only the people nearest could hear. I'm here. 3 words. Late. Insufficient. True. Sometimes truth arrives after damage. It still matters. Catherine pulled herself over the edge a second later and rolled onto her back in the mud, chest heaving. No one rushed to congratulate her. That would have cheapened it. The men simply stared. At her. At the ravine. At the broken ledge below. At the impossible now lying alive on the road. Arjun crouched beside Catherine and handed her a clean cloth without ceremony. She pressed it to her palm. Thanks. He gave a single nod. Then, after a pause, said quietly, You were right. That, from a man like him, was nearly a confession. Catherine looked at him. I usually am when people are about to die. And for the first time all night, Arjun actually laughed. Very softly. Very briefly. But enough. Thomas finally lifted his head. His face had changed. Not softened. Not redeemed. People do not transform in one night because of one pain. That's a lie stories tell when they are afraid of truth. No, he still looked dangerous. Still looked like a man the world had taught to survive by becoming colder than everyone around him. But now there was a fracture in that armor. A human one. And through it, for the first time, something alive was visible. He stood carefully, still holding Anya's hand, and turned toward Catherine. The entire road seemed to wait. He caught the bell to where she said, brains of silly her to do about where she worked for tips. Then Thomas Verma, the man politicians called when they wanted problems erased, the man police commissioners pretended not to know, the man businessmen feared more than bankruptcy did something none of his men had ever seen him do. He lowered himself until he was kneeling in front of a waitress. And he said, with no performance in it at all, Thank you. Catherine held his gaze. Then she looked past him toward the collapsed edge, toward the road, toward the pattern of broken soil. Her hand moved to the satchel at her side, to the blackened metal casing inside. And something in her expression sharpened. This was not over. Not even close. Because the girl had fallen. Yes. But the mountain had not acted alone. And somewhere behind the rescue, behind the fear, behind the family, there was a lie. And lies, Catherine knew, were rarely accidents. By dawn, the rain had stopped. Fog still clung to the hills in pale, drifting bands, but the violence of the night had passed. That was the first cruelty of morning. How ordinary it can look after something nearly irreversible. The ravine still yawned beside the road. The mud still carried the marks of boots, rope drag, and panic. One black SUV had a door hanging open, another had a cracked taillight. The roadside grass was flattened where men had knelt, slipped, and prayed in languages they would never admit to knowing. And on a stretcher laid beneath portable floodlights, wrapped in blankets and heat packs, Anya Verma was alive. Alive. Broken, bruised, sedated, furious with pain but alive. Catherine stood beside her, checking her pulse again as if survival had to be verified repeatedly before it could be trusted. It did. People who have seen loss up close understand that relief is not immediate. It arrives suspiciously, like something that might still be taken back. The helicopter had not yet arrived. Fog was still too thick. So for 1 hour and 23 minutes, the most feared man in northern India waited on a mountain road with his daughter and a waitress who had become, against all logic, the only person he trusted there. That sentence alone should tell you everything about how completely the night had rearranged power. Thomas had made empires bend. He had watched ministers stall legislation, judges postpone hearings, and rivals vanish into procedural darkness. But now, he stood in silence while Catherine adjusted a thermal wrap and told one of his men, without looking at him, "If you move that heat pack higher, you'll make her swell and worse." The man obeyed instantly. He didn't even seem to notice he had obeyed. That's what happens when competence becomes undeniable. People surrender to it before they realize they have. Anya drifted in and out. Pain medicine from the field kit had dulled the sharpest edges, but not enough to let her sleep properly. At one point she reached blindly toward the side of the stretcher. Catherine caught her hand before it slipped away. "Still here," Anya whispered. "Still here." The girl nodded once and relaxed again. Thomas saw that. And something about it sat heavily inside him. Not jealousy. Not exactly. Recognition. That Catherine had entered a place his daughter once reserved for very few people. A place built not on authority, but on trust. And the brutal part? She had earned it in under 3 hours. He had not earned it in years. Truth does not become less true because it humiliates you. It only becomes more expensive to ignore. Arjun approached quietly. He had changed into a dry jacket, but still looked like a man who hadn't unclenched his jaw since midnight. He stopped beside Thomas and kept his voice low. "We swept the collapse zone." Thomas didn't look at him. Arjun's gaze flicked once toward Catherine. She was crouched by Anya's stretcher, focused, but listening. Of course, she was listening. People underestimated service workers because they thought politeness meant absence. That was always a mistake. Arjun said, "There are irregularities." Thomas turned then. "What kind?" "Not the kind I want to discuss in front of everyone." Thomas understood immediately. He always had a fast mind. That was part of what made him dangerous. But tonight, danger was beginning to change shape. He gave a slight nod and walked a few paces away, toward the rear of the lead SUV. Arjun followed. Catherine pretended not to notice. She was not eavesdropping. She was triaging. There is a difference. But when people speak near someone invisible, they often reveal more than they intend. And she had spent enough years carrying plates through conversations to know that. Arjun pulled a sealed evidence pouch from inside his jacket. Inside it were two things: a length of scorched wire and a small cylindrical metal fragment. Thomas's eyes sharpened. He didn't touch the bag. "What is that?" "Looks like detonation residue," Arjun said. "Crude but intentional, probably placed under the road shoulder." Thomas's face didn't move. That was how you knew he was angry. The stiller he became, the more dangerous the room. Or road. Or country. This wasn't weather, Arjun said. No. Someone prepared that edge to fail. Yet. And if the convoy hadn't stopped exactly there. They were hoping it would. The silence that followed was colder than the dawn. Because once you understand something is not an accident, grief has somewhere to go. And grief, when given a target, can become violence in under a heartbeat. Thomas's first instinct was not noble. It was not evolve. It was not heal. It was the old instinct. Find the hand. Break the hand. Then break everything attached to it. That instinct had built half his empire and destroyed the other half without his noticing. Arjun knew it too. He said nothing. Because he had served Thomas long enough to recognize the shape of the storm before it moved. "Sir." The voice came from behind them. "Catherine." Neither man had heard her approach. That irritated Arjun. It unsettled Thomas. She stood there holding a blood-stained strip of gauze in one hand and a steel-eyed calm in the other. I need to tell you something, she said. Thomas looked at the evidence pouch. Then at her. You found something. It wasn't a question. Catherine nodded once. She reached into her satchel and removed the blackened casing she had taken from the ledge. Arjun's eyes narrowed. Thomas took it carefully this time. Not because he feared it. Because he understood its meaning. This was near where she fell, Catherine said, half buried under the shelf. Arjun swore softly under his breath. Thomas stared at the object in his hand. He didn't ask Catherine how she recognized it. He didn't challenge her judgment. He believed her before the proof was complete. That mattered. Because real power, when it is not entirely rotten, recognizes truth by its weight long before it is legally packaged. When were you going to tell me? He asked. When your daughter was warm enough not to die while we discussed explosives. The answer should have annoyed him. Instead, something almost like respect moved through his face. Arjun folded his arms. You understand what this means? Catherine looked at him flatly. It means someone wanted the road to fail. I'm not illiterate just because I carry tea. That one landed. Hot. And deservedly. Arjun took it without protest. Because he was beginning to learn something Thomas had already started to understand. Catherine's restraint was not softness. It was discipline. And disciplined people are very difficult to manipulate. Thomas turned the casing over once in his hand. Then he looked at Catherine. Do you know who would do this? She met his gaze without hesitation. No. Then, after the briefest pause. But I know enough to tell you this wasn't random. Thomas gave a slight nod. He had not expected more. Then she said the sentence that changed the morning. And if you're planning to solve it the way men like you usually solve things, I'm telling you now don't. Arjun's head snapped toward her. Thomas did not move. But his eyes sharpened. Men like me. Catherine didn't back down. Yes. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the SUV roof between them. Somewhere behind them, a medic adjusted a stretcher wheel. The morning kept pretending to be ordinary. I don't know your whole world, Catherine said, and I don't want to, but I know enough. Men with your kind of reach always think justice is whatever they can do fastest in the dark. No one spoke. So she continued. If someone did this, expose them properly. Thomas's face remained unreadable. Catherine's voice lowered. Because if you answer attempted murder with another secret grave, then your daughter almost died for nothing. That sentence cut through him more cleanly than accusation ever could have. Because it was not sentimental. It was structural. It named the choice. Not grief or revenge. Truth or repetition. That is the moral disruption powerful people hate most, not being condemned but being given a chance to become accountable. Thomas held her gaze for a long time. Then he said quietly, You speak to me like you don't understand consequences. Catherine answered just as quietly. No, I speak to you like I do. That ended the conversation. Not because anyone had won. Because truth had been placed on the table and no one there was foolish enough to pretend it wasn't heavy. The helicopter arrived 19 minutes later. Fog lifted just enough for the pilot to land in a clearing down the slope. Medics took over. Anya was moved carefully, loaded, secured. Before she was carried off, she reached again for Catherine's hand. Her grip was weak, but deliberate. Don't disappear, she whispered. Catherine swallowed once. It hit somewhere she hadn't armored. I won't. Thomas heard that too. And he looked at Catherine differently after it. Not romantically. Not yet. Something more dangerous than attraction. Recognition. That his daughter had chosen someone. And people like Thomas Verma knew exactly how rare chosen trust was. He should have left then. Should have boarded the helicopter and returned to the kind of world where he knew how to breathe. Instead, before climbing in, he crossed back to Catherine. The rotor wash whipped her hair loose around her face. He reached into his coat pocket and removed a business card. Heavy stock. Minimal print. No title. Just a number. He held it out. Catherine didn't take it. He noticed. Of course he noticed. If anyone bothers you because of tonight, he said, call. She looked at the card, then at him. And if I don't want to owe you anything? The corner of his mouth moved not into a smile, exactly, but toward one. Then don't call. That was the right answer. and both of them knew it. So Catherine took the car. Not because she trusted him. Because she trusted herself to know when not to use it. That, too, is a form of power. Thomas nodded once. Then turned and boarded the helicopter. No grand speech. No promise. No transaction. Just a man leaving with his injured daughter and a problem he could no longer solve the old way without betraying the one person who had just saved what remained of his soul. By evening, the mountain road had emptied. The SUVs were gone. The floodlights dismantled. The tire tracks would fade in 2 more rains. That's another cruelty of the world. Evidence of catastrophe disappears faster than its consequences. Catherine returned to work that night. Because rent still existed. Because poor people do not get sabbaticals for trauma. Because heroism is very expensive when your fridge is half empty. The dhaba sat just off the highway, a little place with metal tables, a humming refrigerator, and a cracked menu board with prices written in marker. By 7:30 she was carrying steel tumblers of chai and balancing plates of paratha through the dinner rush like nothing in her life had changed. But something had. Of course it had. Her body knew it before her mind did. She dropped a spoon she would normally never drop. Flinched when a pressure cooker lid slammed in the kitchen. Went still for half a second when a customer's daughter laughed too loudly in the corner booth. Invisible workers do not always get the luxury of processing what they survive. Sometimes the body stores it until later. Sometimes much later. At 9:15, the owner's nephew came in from outside and said, "Diddy, there's a fancy car asking for you." Every nerve in Catherine's body sharpened. She set down the tray in her hand and stepped out to the roadside. A black sedan waited beneath a weak yellow parking light. Not one of the SUVs. Smaller. Fleaner. More discreet. Origin stepped out from the driver's side. Of course he did. Catherine folded her arms. If this is a thank you basket, save yourself the fuel. Arjun almost smiled. Almost. It's not. He opened the rear passenger door. Inside sat a leather folder. Nothing else. No one else. He handed it to her. What is it? Hospital updates. Your girl's stable. Catherine took the folder before she could stop herself. Your girl. Strange phrase. But it did something to her chest. She opened it. Inside were copies of scans, doctor notes, and a handwritten summary in clipped, efficient penmanship. No spinal injury. 3 cracked ribs. Severe ankle fracture. Concussion. Observation for 48 hours. Stable. Catherine exhaled. A breath she had apparently been holding all day. Then she looked up. Why give this to me? Arjun shrugged once. She asked for you when she woke up. That landed harder than Catherine expected. And Thomas? He asked me to bring it. There was a beat of silence. Then Arjun added, he also asked me to say he found your moral lecture inconvenient. Catherine stared at him. Then, despite herself, laughed. A short one. But real. Arjun's face turned serious again. And he listened. That mattered more than the laugh. A lot more. Catherine looked down at the file in her hands. Then back at him. If he wants me involved in whatever this becomes, the answer is no. Arjun leaned one shoulder against the car. That wasn't the question. She frowned. What was the question? He wants you to meet Anya when she's discharged. Catherine's jaw tightened instantly. No. What? Because I'm not becoming some emotional support stranger for rich people who discover their daughter nearly died and suddenly want to outsource healing. Arjun absorbed that without reacting. Then said, good. That threw her. What? If you had said yes too quickly, I'd have assumed you were stupid. She stared at him. Then narrowed her eyes. You are deeply irritating. I've heard that. He pushed off the car and straightened. But she asked, repeatedly, so think about it before you decide. He paused. Then added, and there's one more thing. Catherine waited. Arjun's expression changed. So, professional again? Huh. We traced the road work permits. Her spine straightened. The collapse zone falls under a shell contractor connected to Verma infrastructure. Catherine went very still. Thomas's own company. His own network. His own system. The villain, then, was not out in the wilderness. It was inside the house. Inside the machine. Exactly where rot usually lives. Arjun watched her process that. Then said quietly, "This is no longer just a rescue." Catherine looked at the dark highway. At the trucks passing in the distance. At the thin, fragile life she had built with shift work and self-control and very careful expectations. Then she looked back at Arjun. "No," she said, "now it's a test." "Of what?" Her voice turned flint hard. "Of whether powerful men only kneel when they're desperate or whether they can stay bent long enough to tell the truth." Arjun didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because they both knew the real answer hadn't been decided yet. And somewhere in a private hospital room, a girl who had survived the abyss was waking up into a family built on secrets. The rescue had ended. The war had just begun. 3 days later, Catherine took the train to Lucknow. Not because Thomas Verma had summoned her. And certainly not because his money had changed her mind. She went because a 16-year-old girl with cracked ribs, a fractured ankle, and a concussion had asked for her by name when she woke up. That mattered. Children don't always ask for the people they should. They ask for the people who were present when fear was worse. And once someone becomes attached to your voice in the dark, walking away carelessly is its own kind of cruelty. Still, Catherine almost got off the train at Unnao and turned back. Not because she was afraid of Thomas. Because she understood exactly what kind of world she was approaching. Private hospital floors where silence is expensive. Security that smiles without warmth. People who can ruin lives with paperwork instead of bullets. She had spent her entire adult life on the underside of power. She knew the smell of it before she entered the building. Disinfectant. Marble. Air conditioning set too cold. Everything polished enough to imply morality. The hospital itself was quiet in the unnatural way expensive places often are. No crying children in hallways. No relatives sleeping on floors. No nurses sprinting between beds because there weren't enough of them. Here, suffering had been soundproofed. At the reception desk, Catherine gave Anya's name. The woman behind the counter smiled professionally, typed something, then her expression shifted by half a degree. Recognition. Not of Catherine. Of the file note attached to her name. "Please wait one moment." Of course. People like Thomas never just requested visitors. They prepared for them. Catherine hated that she was right. 2 minutes later, Arjun appeared from the elevator lobby. Dark shirt. No visible weapon. Which meant there was absolutely a weapon. He stopped in front of her and looked down once at her canvas bag, her worn sandals, her pressed but inexpensive kurta. "You came." Catherine gave him a flat look. She asked. He nodded once. Good. She hated how often that one word from him felt like actual approval. "I'm not staying long." "We'll see." That wasn't an invitation for mystery. Arjun pressed the elevator button. It wasn't meant to be. The doors opened. They stepped inside. As the elevator rose, Catherine watched the polished steel doors reflect them back. A waitress from a roadside dhaba. A security chief who looked like he'd once broken bones for a living and maybe still did. Neither of them belonged in the same frame. And yet there they were. That was the thing about disruption. It never asks permission to become structurally inconvenient. Anya's room was at the end of a private corridor. 2 guards stood outside. Neither touched a weapon. Neither needed to. They moved aside immediately when Arjun approached. Catherine stopped. Turned to him. "If I go in there and find her father waiting behind some emotional ambush, I will leave." Arjun looked almost offended. "He's not inside." Good. Then she opened the door. Anya was sitting upright in bed, pale but conscious, one leg elevated in a brace, bruises beginning to bloom across her cheekbone and temple in ugly watercolor shades. Her hair was braided badly. Hospital braid. Done by someone trying but unqualified. Probably a nurse. Or a father. She looked up. Saw Catherine. And her entire face changed. Not into joy exactly. Something more vulnerable than that. Relief. "You came." The sentence hit Catherine harder than she expected. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. I said I would. Anya looked at her for a second like she was testing whether that sentence could really exist in the world. Then she blinked too fast and looked away. Most people say things because it sounds good. Catherine set her bag down on the side chair. Then most people are exhausting. That got a tiny smile. Ugh. She crossed to the bed. How's the pain? Like being hit by a truck and then insulted afterward. Any nausea? A little. Blurred vision. Only when my father's lawyer talks. That one actually made Catherine laugh. Softly. But enough. And because the room was finally warm, because the machines were steady, because the girl in the bed was no longer suspended over death by a cracked shelf of earth, the laugh didn't feel like betrayal. It felt earned. They talked for nearly an hour. Not about the ravine at first. About smaller things. Safer things. School. Anya's hatred of chemistry. The fact that she'd been sent to a boarding school she never wanted. The terrible tea in the hospital. The nurse who pronounced croissant like croissant and said it with confidence. Eventually, as it always does, the conversation found the wound beneath the visible wound. My mother would have hated this room, Anya said suddenly. Catherine glanced up from adjusting the edge of her blanket. What? She said rich people design hospitals to look like hotels so no one has to admit they're scared. Catherine considered that. Then nodded. She sounds like she had range. Anya smiled faintly. Then the smile disappeared. She also would have known I'm scared. There it was. The truth. Always smaller and sadder when it finally speaks. Catherine sat down in the chair beside the bed. You think your father doesn't? Anya looked out the window. He notices danger, not feelings. That sentence was too precise to have been formed overnight. It had history in it. Neglect always does. Catherine could have said something comforting and dishonest. He loves you in his own way. He's trying. He's grieving too. All of which may have been partially true. And none of which would have helped. So she said the harder, cleaner thing. Then he's going to have to learn. Anya turned back toward her. A long silence followed. Then, carefully. Will he? Catherine held her gaze. I don't know yet. That was the only ethical answer. False hope is still a lie even when it's wrapped in kindness. And something in Anya's face relaxed at hearing the truth unsoftened. Children trust honesty more than reassurance. Especially the ones who have been disappointed by polished adults. A knock sounded at the door. Then it opened. Thomas entered. Not dramatically. No entourage. No phone in hand. Just Thomas in a charcoal shirt with the sleeves rolled once at the forearm, looking more tired than powerful for the first time since Catherine had met him. He stopped when he saw the two of them talking. Something moved through his expression. Not jealousy. Not possession. Something more difficult. The realization that a connection had formed without his control and might now reveal what control had cost him. Am I interrupting? He asked. Anya looked away. Depends. Thomas absorbed that. Then, to Catherine's surprise, he did not push. I can come back. That surprised Anya too. You could see it. A father who usually entered rooms like a decision had just offered choice. Small moment. Huge meaning. Catherine stood. I should go anyway. No, Anya said too quickly. Then, quieter please. That made all three of them still for half a second. Because now the shape of the room had changed. This was no longer a courtesy visit. This was a triangle. A child, a father, and a stranger who had become a bridge neither of them knew how to build alone. Dangerous arrangement. Necessary one. Catherine looked at Thomas. Then at Anya. Then back again. And because she had already decided, somewhere deep down, that she would not become another adult who walked away the moment things got emotionally inconvenient, she stayed. But not silently. Not passively. Not without terms. She set her bag down again and turned fully toward Thomas. If I'm in this room, she said, then I'm not decoration. Thomas's brows lifted slightly. Catherine kept going. I'm not here to make this easier for you all. Nothing changes for her. Anya went very still. Thomas, to his credit, did not interrupt. If you want me around your daughter, Catherine said, then there are conditions. Arjun, who had entered quietly and remained near the wall, folded his arms and looked like he was watching a building being renovated with explosives. Thomas asked, what conditions? Catherine counted them calmly. You don't lie to her when the truth is difficult but age-appropriate. Thomas said nothing. You don't use gifts instead of time. His jaw shifted once. You don't send someone else when she asks for you. That one landed. But still, he didn't defend himself. Duh. And if you're investigating what happened on that road, you do it legally. Arjun's eyes flicked to Thomas. Anya looked between them. What do you mean, investigating? There it was. The moment. No more soft edges. No more waiting. Thomas looked at Catherine. Not annoy. Not corner. Almost asking. Not for permission. For calibration. That mattered too. Catherine answered for him. We found signs the collapse may not have been natural. Anya stared. What? Thomas stepped closer to the bed. Not too close. Learning, however clumsily, was still learning. We don't know everything yet, he said carefully, but there is reason to believe the roadside was tampered with. Anya's face drained of what little color remained. So someone tried to. He cut in gently. We don't know who the target was. That was true. And insufficient. Which made it the correct kind of truth to begin with. Anya looked from him to Catherine. Then to Arjun. And Catherine saw the exact second the girl understood the thing powerful families always force their children to learn too early. Danger was not an event around her life. It was built into the architecture of it. She swallowed. Then said, very quietly, was it because of you? No father on earth should ever have to hear that from his child. And some absolutely deserve to. Thomas did not answer immediately. That, more than anything, told the truth. Anya looked away before he finally said, possibly. The room held still. Machines hummed. Traffic murmured far below the sealed windows. Then Anya laughed once. Short. Joe. Woken. Of course. Thomas flinched. Though but Catherine saw it. Because pain doesn't always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like a man standing upright while his daughter names the cost of his choices. Catherine spoke before silence could harden into something useless. This is why I said conditions. Both of them looked at her. If I stay involved, she said, it's because she deserves one adult in this situation who isn't treating truth like a controlled substance. Anya blinked. Then looked down at her blanket. Thomas studied Catherine for a long time. And when he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual. Agreed. Catherine frowned. That quickly. His expression shifted by half a degree. You think I only know how to resist? She answered honestly. So far. That almost became a smile again. Almost. Then it vanished. Stay, he said. Not an order. An offer. And Catherine, who had spent years translating the language of power into actual meaning, heard what sat beneath it. Help me not fail her again. She turned to Anya. What do you want? That was the only question that mattered. Anya looked at her father. Really looked. Then at Catherine. Then back again. I want both of you to stop deciding around me. Good. Excellent, even. Catherine nodded once. Ver. Thomas, to his credit, did too. And that was how it began. Not romance. Not trust. Not redemption. A working arrangement built out of necessity, truth, and one injured girl's refusal to be managed. Which, in many families, is the first real step toward healing. The investigation moved quickly after that. Too quickly for it to be clean. Arjun brought files. Contract records. Road maintenance invoices. Subcontractor names. Permit approvals. Catherine was not supposed to be in those conversations. Which was exactly why she was useful. Invisible people notice what official people normalize. She said, Thomas stood by the window, phone silent for once. Anya, in a wheelchair with her leg propped up, watched from beside the bed like a queen recovering from war and already planning tax reform. This contractor, Arjun said, tapping a file, exists on paper only, registered 18 months ago. No real office, no payroll history, no equipment lease records. Catherine leaned forward. Who approved them? Arjun named a senior project manager from Thomas's infrastructure division. Thomas's face darkened. That man's been with us 11 years. Catherine looked at the file again. Exactly. Both men looked at her. She pointed to the pattern of invoices. Shell companies don't hide well unless someone established enough is signing off. You don't give sabotage access to a brand new outsider unless an insider is laundering legitimacy. Arjun stared at her. Anya stared at her. Thomas did not blink. What? Catherine asked. Arjun spoke first. You read financial fraud? Catherine shrugged. I worked billing for 6 months at a clinic before the owner stopped paying salaries. If you've ever watched poor people get destroyed by administrative theft, you learn the shape of paperwork crime very fast. That shut the room up. Because once again, she had done the thing powerful people are always least prepared for. Turned invisible labor into strategic intelligence. Thomas crossed to the table. Looked down at the files. Then at her. Who are you really? It was not flirtation. Not suspicion either. Something more honest. A man realizing he had mistaken social position for human scale. Catherine met his gaze. A woman you would have ignored if your daughter hadn't fallen. That one stayed in the room. And deserved to. Because he would have. Of course he would have. Howard trains people to look past the hands that keep their world functioning. Until one of those hands reaches into the dark and returns with the only thing they cannot replace. Then suddenly the invisible becomes indispensable. That does not absolve the system. It indicts it. And Thomas Verma, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, was beginning to understand the difference. By the end of the week, the truth had narrowed. Not to certainty, but to shade. The sabotage had not come from a rival cartel. Not directly. It had come from inside Thomas's own legal empire. A man named Vikram Setha, Chief Operations Officer for Verma Infrastructure. Polite. Educated. Trusted. A family friend after Thomas's wife died. The kind of man who sent flowers to funerals and poison to accounting departments. His motive, once Arjun dug deeper, was brutally simple. Thomas had recently begun moving assets, cutting off certain gray money channels and restructuring transport routes after Anya's accident. But Catherine saw what Arjun didn't at first. No, not after. Before. The road contract had been signed weeks earlier. This wasn't a reaction. It was preemptive. Vikram had known something was shifting inside Thomas. Maybe not repentance. Maybe not reform. But instability. And in criminal ecosystems, instability is blood and water. If Thomas's family was vulnerable, then Thomas was easier to corner. Maybe the target had been Thomas himself. Maybe the convoy. Maybe just pressure. But once Anya had fallen, the line between intention and consequence stopped mattering. Which left only one real question. Would Thomas expose the man publicly? Or erase him privately? That was the crossroads. And Catherine knew it. So did Thomas. And when he asked her to come to his estate the following Sunday to review the final evidence before he made his move, she said yes. But only after adding one last condition. If I walk into your house, she told him over the phone, I walk out the same person. No gifts, no favors, no traps. On the other end of the line, Thomas was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said very softly, Understood. And because tone matters, because respect is often revealed not in what a man offers but in what he refrains from forcing. Catherine believed him. Not completely. Not blindly. Just enough to step closer to the fire. Sometimes that is how history changes. Not with certainty. With one morally careful yes at a time. The Verma estate did not look like the kind of place where truth was welcome. It looked like the kind of place where truth was dressed, delayed, negotiated, and finally buried under imported stone. The gates alone were taller than Catherine's rented room. Black iron. Silent cameras. Men at the perimeter who did not look like security guards so much as consequences. And beyond them, set back behind old neem trees and geometric lawns, the house rose in pale sandstone and glass, beautiful in the way expensive things often are when they have been purchased to prove invulnerability. Catherine hated it immediately. Not because it was elegant. Because it was insulated. Homes like this are built to protect people from weather, inconvenience, interruption, and, if possible, accountability. And yet she stepped out of the cab anyway. Because Anya was inside. Because Vikram Sethai was still walking free. And because once you have interrupted power, you do not get to pretend neutrality afterward. Neutrality is often just cowardice with good posture. Arjun met her at the entrance. He looked exactly the same as he always did, controlled, efficient, mildly disapproving of the existence of furniture. "You're late," he said. Catherine checked the cheap watch on her wrists. "I'm 3 minutes early." He glanced at his own watch. Then at her. Do you feel lighter now that we've established I'm correct?" Arjun looked away before the near smile could fully happen. "Come in." Inside, the house was quieter than a museum. Too quiet for a place where a child had almost died. The floors shone. The walls held expensive art that looked selected by consultants rather than loved by human beings. Fresh lilies sat in a crystal vase near the staircase. Catherine noticed immediately that none of them had a scent. Even the flowers in this house had been curated not to inconvenience anyone. "Do people actually live here?" she murmured, "or is this where guilt comes to echo?" Arjun stopped walking for half a beat. Then kept going. "You're impossible. And yet here I am." The study was at the back of the house. Heavy doors. Long table. Screens on the wall. Paper files laid out with military precision. It looked less like a room for family and more like a place where wars were made to resemble meetings. Tanas stood near the far window in a dark suit with no tie, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of water he had clearly forgotten to drink. When he turned and saw Catherine, something in his expression eased. But now. That alone told her more than it should have. He had expected her to come. He had still been relieved when she did. That is not a small distinction. Because men like Tanas are used to attendance, not voluntary presence. He inclined his head. "You found the place." Catherine set her bag down on a chair. "Your gate guards look deeply offended that I exist, but yes." One corner of his mouth moved. Again, not a smile exactly. Just the visible edge of one. It changed his whole face. Dangerous thing, softness. Especially on people who have weaponized hardness for years. It can make them seem safer than they are. Catherine knew that. So she did what she always did when a room threatened to become emotionally slippery. She got practical. "Where's Anya?" "Upstairs, resting." "Does she know why I'm here?" "Yes." Thomas hesitated. Then answered honestly. "She said if I handled this quietly, she'd never forgive me." Catherine held his gaze for a long second. Then nodded once. "But he accepted that too." "Interesting. Very interesting." Because a month ago Thomas Verma would have taken offense at being morally evaluated in his own house by a woman who lived paycheck to paycheck and wore flat sandals from a roadside market. Now, he seemed to understand that offense was a luxury he had no right to. That was growth, not redemption. Both. Stories that confuse the two become dishonest. Arjun activated the first screen. A timeline appeared. Contracts. Payments. Phone record. Maintenance permits. Construction access logs. Drone survey images of the road shoulder before and after the tampering. The evidence was clean. Cleaner than Catherine expected. Too clean for a private revenge operation. Which meant Thomas had actually listened. He had built a case. Not an execution. She noticed that. And because she was fair even when she was suspicious, she let it matter. Vikram Sethai's name appeared again and again. Subcontract authorizations routed through shell vendors. Unusual transfers. Calls to a known explosives intermediary in Prayagraj. Internal memos deleted and recovered. Then the final item. A voice recording. Vikram in a parked car speaking to someone unidentified. We don't need him dead, the recording said. We need him afraid enough to sign before Diwali. Damage the route. Send the message. Catherine's jaw tightened. Thomas's face did not move at all, but his stillness had gone from controlled to lethal. Play the rest, he said. The voice continued. And if the convoy stops there, that's on him. He shouldn't be bringing family onto business roads. Silence. The kind that doesn't merely fill a room. The kind that rearranges it. Because there it was. Not only sabotage. Not only betrayal. Moral cowardice. The ugliest kind. The kind that harms children and then calls it logistics. Catherine looked at Thomas. He had gone very pale. Not with fear. With rage held so tightly it had nowhere left to go except inward. That is always dangerous. But for the first time since she had met him, Catherine didn't think the danger would leave the room through violence. Not because he wasn't capable of it. Because he was finally capable of something harder. Restraint with consequences. That is a rarer form of strength than people admit. So Catherine said quietly, "What happens now?" Thomas looked at the screen. Then at the evidence table. Then finally at her. Vikram is on his way here. Arjun looked at her once, gauging the reaction. Catherine's eyes narrowed. Ew. Thomas nodded. He thinks this is a routine strategy meeting. And after he arrives? Thomas set the untouched water glass down. I give him one chance to tell the truth. Catherine crossed her arms. And if he doesn't? Thomas held her gaze. Then I expose him in front of everyone whose respect he's built his life on. That was not the answer she expected. It was, however, the correct one. She let the silence sit for a moment. Then asked the question that mattered more than all the rest. And the police? They've already been sent a duplicate evidence package, Arjun said. Catherine turned sharply. You already sent it? Thomas answered this time. Yes. Not defensive. Just plain. So she studied him. Really studied him. The set of his shoulders. The exhaustion around his eyes. The old violence still alive in him, but no longer steering the wheel alone. And slowly, against her own suspicion, she believed it. He was actually going to do it. He was actually going to let the truth stand in daylight. Not because the law had frightened him. Because his daughter had changed the cost of secrecy. That is how moral reform usually happens, when it happens at all. Not because someone suddenly becomes pure. Because one thing they love survives the consequences of their corruption long enough to force a choice. At 4:12 p.m., Vikram Sethai arrived. He was exactly the kind of man Catherine had expected. Immaculate linen shirt. Measured smile. Expensive watch. A face trained for condolence and quarterly reporting. He entered the study with practiced warmth. Thomas, he said, extending a hand. How's Anya doing? Thomas did not take the hand. Vikram's smile paused. Just slightly. Then his eyes moved around the room. Arjun. The screens. The files. And finally, Catherine. He dismissed her instantly. Of course he did. Waitress clothes. No pedigree. No relevance. That was his first mistake. Men like Vikram rarely recognize the women who end them until it's too late. Sit, Thomas said. Vikram sat. Carefully now. The room had changed temperature. He could feel it. Predators always can. What's this about? He asked. Thomas remained standing. You authorized road maintenance on the Stone Ridge route on October 19. Vikram blinked once. Possibly, it's one of many. You routed that authorization through a shell contractor. If pos. Then the first lie. That would be procurement. Arjun slid a file across the table. Signed with your direct credentials. Vikram didn't touch it. Thomas took one slow step forward. Say the truth once, he said. I'll give you that much. There are moments in a room when everyone present knows the path has forked. This was one. Vikram still had a way out. Not of consequence. Of dignity. He could have told the truth. He could have said, yes, I did it. I miscalculated. I thought pressure would control you. I didn't know your daughter would be there. Cowardly still. But at least human. Instead, he made the second mistake. He smirked. Snarl. Almost pitying. Thomas, he said, with respect, grief has made you paranoid. Catherine felt the entire room harden. Not because the lie was clever. Because it insulted the dead, the injured, and the truth all at once. That kind of arrogance deserves its own downfall. Thomas nodded once, as if something had now been settled. Then he pressed a button on the table. The wall screen behind him changed. A live video call filled the frame. Not one person. Many. Board members. Legal counsel. 2 external auditors. A retired judge who sat on Verma Foundation oversight. And, to Vikram's visible horror, 1 senior officer from the State Economic Offenses Wing. Vikram went white. Thomas's voice, when he spoke, was almost gentle. You should have taken the first chance. That was when Vikram finally understood. This was not a threat in the dark. This was annihilation in the light. And for men who build themselves on credibility, public exposure is often worse than prison. Because prison at least preserves myth. Humiliation destroys it. What followed was not loud, not theatrical. And because of that, it was devastating. Arjun presented the financial chain. The auditors confirmed the shell vendors. The officer on the screen acknowledged receipt of the evidence package and active warrants pending formal signature. The recovered voice recording played in full. No one interrupted it. No one needed to. Vikram tried denial. Then minimization. Then distancing. Then, when those failed, the oldest language of cowards. I was protecting the business. Thomas looked at him like a man looking at rot in a beam he had once trusted to hold up a house. You endangered my daughter. Vikram swallowed. That wasn't the intention. Thomas's answer came like a blade laid flat on a table. Intention is what men say when consequence embarrasses them. Catherine's eyes flicked to him. That line had truth in it deeper than the moment required. He knew it. She knew he knew it. That was what made it real. Vikram tried one last pivot. You built this world, Thomas. Don't act righteous now. The room went still. Because there it was. The accusation beneath every reform. Hypocrisy. And to be fair, it was not baseless. Thomas had built systems where men like Vikram learned what was rewarded. That mattered. Always. But this is where many stories become cowardly. They try to purify the powerful man so the audience can feel clean loving him. Life is not that generous. Thomas did not deny it. He did not claim innocence. He did not say you're wrong. He said the harder thing. Yes. Everyone in the room still. Thomas continued. I built conditions that made you think this would be survivable. Catherine felt her breath catch. Because accountability without self-exoneration is rare enough to feel almost shocking. Thomas's eyes never left Vikram's. That is on me. Then his voice changed. Steel under ash. But what you chose to do with that permission is on you. That was the line. The moral line. The one that separates systemic guilt from personal evil. And once it was spoken, Vikram had nowhere left to hide. Security entered 2 minutes later. No struggle. No cinematic chase. Just a man in an expensive shirt realizing his life had ended not with gunfire, but with documentation. That, too, was Fing. He had used systems to endanger people. Now systems would close over him. As he was let out, his eyes found Catherine one last time. Dismissive still. Confused still. As if he could not understand how a woman like her had been in the room where he fell. That was his final mistake. Thinking social invisibility means actual irrelevance. It doesn't. It means people like Catherine often see collapse before anyone else. After Vikram was taken away, the study emptied slowly. Calls were made. Lawyers moved. Arjun disappeared into logistics with the calm brutality of a man born for aftermath. The sun had lowered by then, amber light stretching across the study floor. And for the first time all day, the house felt human enough to hold silence without choking on it. Catherine stood near the long table, gathering her bag. Thomas remained by the window. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then he said, "You were right." She glanced at him. About which thing? I've said a lot of difficult truths in this house. That did it. He laughed. Not much. Not loudly. But fully. The sound startled both of them. Then it faded. And what remained in his face after it was something far more intimate than flirtation. Weariness. Gratitude. Grief. Humility. He crossed the room toward her. Stopped a respectful distance away. I would have handled this differently before. Catherine nodded. I know. I might still want to. I know. If pause. Then, lower. But I won't. That mattered more than any apology. Because apologies without altered behavior are just theater. Catherine looked at him for a long moment. Then said, good. Again, not warmth. Not surrender. Recognition. That he had, in fact, chosen. And choice is the axis on which character turns. Not history. Not trauma. Not even love. Choice. Always choice. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Catherine's expression hardened immediately. If that's another check, I'm leaving. Thomas's mouth moved faintly. It's not. He handed her a folded document instead. She took it cautiously and opened it. Then frowned. It was a deed transfer draft. Not to the estate. Not to any Verma property. To a small, undeveloped parcel of land outside the district hospital road near her neighborhood. Zoned for community medical use. She looked up sharply. What is this? Thomas answered simply. A legal offer. Her eyes narrowed. That sounds suspiciously expensive. It is. No. He had expected that. Of course he had. So he said the sentence he had clearly rehearsed carefully enough not to insult her. Then don't take it as a gift. She said nothing. He continued. Take it as infrastructure. That got her attention. He saw it. Pressed on. Anya told me you once studied for nursing entrance but had to leave when your father got sick. Catherine's face changed instantly. Not open anger. Was a closed one. Why is my history in your mouth? Thomas did not flinch. Because I asked for nothing I couldn't verify ethically, and because I needed to know whether what I was offering would be useful or humiliating. That answer was annoyingly careful. She hated that. He continued before she could object. The land would be held in an independent trust under your control and 2 external signatories of your choosing. No employment obligation, no personal debt, no access for me once transferred. Catherine stared at him. Then at the document. Then back again. He was offering her the thing poor people are almost never given. Not charity. Structure. A place to build something that could outlast gratitude. That was different. And because it was different, it was harder to dismiss. Still, she folded the document shut and handed it back. Not today. Thomas took it. No offense. No pressure. Just a nod. As you wish. That, too, mattered. A man used to obtaining outcomes had just let her refusal stand without negotiation. Respect is often most visible in what a person doesn't push after hearing no. Later that evening, Anya insisted on coming downstairs on crutches despite everyone objecting. Naturally, she won. Children recovering from trauma often develop an immediate and inconvenient appetite for self-determination. Good for them. She entered the sitting room like a war survivor in borrowed socks and hospital fatigue, took one look at Catherine, and said, "You're not allowed to leave before tea." Catherine blinked. "Is that a medical order?" "It is now." Thomas, standing near the fireplace, looked almost helplessly amused. Arjun, from the doorway, looked like he was reconsidering his allegiance to all living people. Tea was broth. Actual tea this time. Strong enough not to insult the concept. They sat not like a family exactly, not yet, but like people learning how to occupy the same piece without reaching immediately for armor. Anya talked more than either of them. About school applications. About how she might never trust mountain roads again. About how if her father ever tried to send her away for her own good one more time, she would leak his blood pressure medication list to the internet. Thomas, astonishingly, accepted this with grace. At one point, Catherine lived to listen to the start interrupting, non-hurrying, not entry, and she realized the eventuality that they had to radical that had done all week. Not expose a corrupt executive. Not reroute evidence through legal channels. Listen. People underestimate that. They shouldn't. Listening is one of the purest ways power kneels. Months passed. Then more. Reform is never as beautiful as endings try to make it. It was messy. Costly. Slow. There were investigations. Asset reviews. Internal resignations. 2 attempted retaliations that Arjun handled without details Catherine specifically did not ask for. Thomas began separating his legitimate businesses from the shadow structures that had fed off them for years. Not perfectly. Not painlessly. But for real. He shut down routes. Cut ties. Turned over records. Lost allies. Gained enemies. Kept going. Because once a man has heard his daughter call for him from the dark and understood he might lose her because of the world he built, certain old appetites become harder to justify. Not impossible. Harder. That is more believable. And therefore more meaningful. Catherine, meanwhile, did not become ornamental. She refused every easy role the world would have tried to write for her. Not mistress. Not employee. Not mascot for his moral awakening. She kept working for a while. Saved money. Took evening classes. Re-entered a nursing bridge program with documentation Thomas never touched and funding she eventually accepted only after restructuring the land offer into an independent rural urgent care trust exactly as she demanded. The clinic opened 18 months later. Not fancy. Not polished. Not built to flatter donors. Built to work. 2 examination rooms. 1 small pharmacy unit. Emergency stabilization bay. Sliding fee scale. A waiting area with mismatched chairs and a tea kettle in the corner because fear softens a little when someone offers warmth without paperwork. The sign outside read, Catherine Community Health Center. No vermin name anywhere on it. That was deliberate. Inside the reception area, however, on a small brass plaque near the wall were 4 engraved words. Because silence costs lives. That was Catherine's line. Thomas never argued. Anya visited constantly. Sometimes with homework. Sometimes with gossip. Sometimes just to sit behind the front desk and declare herself assistant administrator while being useless in deeply charming ways. She healed. Not all at once. Not cleanly. Trauma leaves weather inside people. But she healed. She stopped apologizing for taking up emotional space. Started volunteering with emergency outreach drives. Eventually announced one summer afternoon while sorting vaccination forms that she wanted to study medicine. Not prestige medicine. Not cosmetic surgery for rich cowards. Community trauma care. The kind that reaches the people systems forget. Thomas looked at her for a long time after she said it. Then asked only one question. Are you choosing that because of me? Anya answered without hesitation. No, I'm choosing it because of her. And she looked at Catherine. That should have hurt him. Maybe a little, it did. But what it mostly did was free him. Because for once, his daughter's future was not a reaction to his damage. It was a choice toward meaning. And that is one of the greatest gifts a child can ever recover after surviving a parent's mistakes. As for Thomas and Catherine, no, it did not become a whirlwind. No declarations under chandeliers. No possessive nonsense. No dramatic proposal 6 weeks after trauma. That would have been dishonest. What grew between them took its time. Tea after long days. Conversations on clinic steps after closing. Disagreements sharp enough to keep both of them honest. Mutual respect before tenderness. Choice before intimacy. He learned not to solve every problem with access. She learned that not every powerful man who listens is pretending. He never touched her without asking. Never arrived without warning. Never used money as emotional leverage again after the second time she nearly threw a file folder at his head. He needed training. Eventually, much later than stories usually allow, she let him stay one evening after the rain when the clinic generator failed and the whole neighborhood glowed by lantern light. They sat on the veranda in the dark. No declarations. Just silence. The good kind. The earned kind. After a while, Thomas said quietly, "You changed everything." Catherine looked out at the road. "No," she said, "I interrupted it." He turned toward her. And because he had finally learned not to rush sacred things, he only answered, "Thank God you did." That was closer to love than most people ever get, honestly. 2 years after the night on the ravine, they returned there together. Not for closure. Closure is an over-marketed lie. People don't close around the things that almost ended them. They learned how to live beside them. The road had been rebuilt properly this time. Guardrails installed. Drainage reinforced. Warning signs placed where there had once been nothing but arrogance and loose earth. Anya stood between them in jeans and hiking boots, the scar at her temple now a thin silver memory in the afternoon light. The ravine below looked smaller in daylight. They always do. That's another trick of survival. The things that nearly killed you rarely stay visually proportional to what they change. Catherine looked down into the old darkness, then up at the sky. Thomas stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets, not crowding, not claiming, simply there. Present. At last. That was the real miracle. Not that his daughter survived, though that mattered beyond language. Not that the villain fell, though justice mattered too. The miracle was that after the fall, after the shame, after the exposure and restructuring and grief, he stayed. And she stayed because she chose to. Not because she was trapped by need. Not because he purchased her future. Because choice, in the end, is the only power that doesn't rot when the lights go out. Anya took a picture of them both before either could object. "You two look impossible," she said. Catherine snorted. "Fatuous." Thomas looked at the photo and, for once, did not correct the framing. Impossible things had already happened. Why argue with one more? That evening, back at the clinic, the last patient left just before sunset. The kettle whistled. A radio hummed faintly from the back room. Outside, scooters passed, children shouted in the lane, and someone nearby was frying onions in too much oil. Real life. Busy. Unglamorous. Precious. Catherine locked the front door and turned the sign to close. Inside, Anya was asleep on the waiting room bench with a textbook open over her chest. Thomas stood by the pharmacy shelf pretending not to smile at the sight. Catherine looked at both of them and felt something she had not trusted in years. This. Not perfect peace. Not permanent peace. Just the kind you can only earn after choosing truth repeatedly when lies would have been easier. She poured 3 cups of tea anyway. One for now. One for when Anya woke up. And one for the man who had once ruled by fear and now knew enough to wait quietly in a room built by a woman he could not buy. That final image was not flashy. It was better. A small clinic. A sleeping girl. A kettle cooling on the stove. A man who had learned to stay. And a woman who had never wanted power, but changed its shape simply by refusing to be silent when silence would have been immoral. That is how some worlds are saved. Not by the loudest person in the room. By the one everyone almost failed to see. People often mistake silence for weakness. They assume the quiet woman serving tea, cleaning floors, carrying files, or working double shifts has no real influence over the shape of the world. But sometimes the most powerful person in the story is the one no one bothered to notice until truth became necessary. Money can command obedience. Fear can control rooms. Violence can remove obstacles. But only character can carry another human being out of the dark. And in the end, that is the power that lasts. If stories like this remind you that strength doesn't always look loud, then don't forget to subscribe for more.